I still remember that evening as if it were etched into my skin. The house smelled of rosemary, lamb, and expensive candles, scents I had never once used in my own modest kitchen. My son's home looked like it had stepped straight out of a glossy magazine, marble countertops, tall glass doors, a chandelier that sparkled like a night sky I no longer felt part of. I stood in the entryway for a moment too long, clutching the small dish I had prepared, a simple casserole I thought would bring a touch of warmth to the table. My hands trembled as I adjusted the foil cover, hoping no one would notice the faint shake. At 72, some things could no longer be hidden. Before we continue with the rest of the story, please comment where you're listening to this from. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The laughter from the dining room carried toward me, rich and confident. Guests dressed in pressed suits and shimmering dresses leaned back in their chairs as though they owned the world. My son, Daniel, sat among them, his posture stiff, his eyes darting once to the doorway where I stood. He smiled quickly, an automatic reflex, but his gaze slid away before it could reach his heart. Beside him, my daughter-in-law, Cassandra, glittered in a red silk dress, her lips painted to match. She lifted a glass of wine, catching the chandelier light, and when she spoke, the room seemed to hush. I had never been that kind of woman, the kind who commanded silence with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. I had been the woman who boiled potatoes and mended socks and stayed up late to finish school projects Daniel forgot until the night before. "Mother," Cassandra's voice rang across the table as I entered. "You finally made it." She rose halfway, as though the effort to greet me cost her dearly, then sat back down with a rustle of silk. My dish suddenly felt absurdly out of place. A humble offering, in a world of gourmet meals and plated artistry. I tried to smile, but my lips felt stiff. I thought a little something homemade might add. Her laugh cut through me, light and sharp. "Homemade?" she repeated, letting the word hang, as if it were quaint, almost comedic. Then, without lowering her voice, she added, "Well, at least it won't go to waste." Daniel always did have a taste for old-fashioned comfort food. A ripple of chuckles spread around the table. Daniel looked down at his plate, tracing the rim with his fork. He didn't defend me, didn't even look at me. And in that silence, in that tiny act of avoidance, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made pressing against my chest. I set the casserole gently on the sideboard, my hands suddenly unsure of themselves. My fingers brushed the polished marble, and I pulled back quickly, as though I might stain it simply by touching. The conversations resumed, louder now, filling the air with stories of vacations in Europe, investments, and wine vintages. Words I didn't fully understand flowed around me like a current too strong to step into. I stood at the edge, my shoulders rounded, wishing the floor would open and swallow me whole. Then Cassandra leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning me as if I were an exhibit in a museum of outdated relics. She didn't whisper. She wanted me to hear, and more importantly, she wanted everyone else to hear too. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder why she even comes," she said, tipping her chin toward me. "She can't help with the cooking. She doesn't understand half the conversations. It feels useless, really." The word hit me like a stone to the chest. Useless. Not tired. Not old. Not out of touch. Useless. My ears rang. For a moment, I thought I might drop right there in front of them, my body finally giving out under the weight of humiliation. I caught my breath, steadied myself on the back of an empty chair. I didn't mean to intrude," I whispered, though my words barely reached my own ears. No one responded. The laughter swelled again, as though her remark had been nothing more than a witty observation at my expense. Daniel glanced up then, his eyes meeting mine just long enough for me to see the shame flicker in them. But still, he said nothing. That hurt more than Cassandra's words. My son, my only child, who I had held through fevers, who I had worked double shifts for so he could go to college, who I had believed would always remember the mother who carried him through lean years. He couldn't bring himself to stand for me now. I sat down quietly in the farthest chair, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. My dish sat untouched on the sideboard, forgotten under its foil cover. I forced myself to look straight ahead, to smile when the others laughed, to nod as though I belonged. Inside, though, something broke. It wasn't just Cassandra's cruelty that cut me open that night. It was the realization that maybe, in their eyes, she was right. That maybe I had outlived my usefulness. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you, have you ever been dismissed like that, by the very people you love most? If you have, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Because no one deserves to be called useless. Not after a lifetime of giving, of loving, of sacrificing. And as I sat there, the word echoing in my head, I had no idea it was only the beginning. When I was a girl, I used to imagine what wealth looked like. I thought it was a basket filled with ripe apples in winter, or a pair of shoes that didn't pinch after a long day's work. I never imagined wealth would look like this. Like the gleaming banisters of Daniel's staircase, the velvet curtains that shimmered with every movement of the air conditioning, the floor so polished. I was afraid to let my worn shoes touch it. Daniel and Cassandra's house wasn't just a home, it was a statement. It shouted success from every corner. Success that, in quiet moments, I reminded myself I had helped build. All those years scrubbing floors, stitching hems, and saying no to myself so I could say yes to him. That was my invisible signature on this mansion. Yet standing there, surrounded by crystal and silk, I felt like a trespasser in a life I had no right to claim. Daniel had grown into a man I sometimes struggled to recognize. He had my husband's broad shoulders, but not his gentle patience. Instead, he carried himself with a stiffness that seemed to come from always bracing for Cassandra's approval or disapproval. His laugh was polite, practiced, the kind of laugh that filled the space without ever touching the soul. I remembered the boy who used to sit cross-legged on the kitchen floor, giggling over burnt cookies, and I wondered when that sound had disappeared. And then there was Cassandra. Even her name felt sharp, like the snap of a silk scarf in the wind. She was beautiful. No one could deny that long hair that caught the light, cheekbones sculpted as if they were cut from marble. But beauty wasn't the problem. It was the way she wore it, like armor, polished and gleaming, daring anyone to find a crack. She had been raised in circles I never stepped into, taught the languages of investments, fine wines, and social cues that I could never mimic. To her, I wasn't just out of place. I was a liability, a reminder of roots she wanted to bury. My grandson, however, was the only one who bridged the two worlds. Little Matthew, only 6, with curls that refused to be tamed and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He ran to me when I entered, before Cassandra's words sliced through the air, before the evening turned sour. He hugged my legs and whispered, "Grandma, did you bring cookies?" That tiny voice, warm and hopeful, was the only thread tethering me to the night. If not for him, I might have turned and left the moment Cassandra's laughter echoed across the table. As the dinner carried on, I sat quietly, my back straight, my hands folded, as though posture alone might help me blend in, but I couldn't ignore the contrast. Their polished silver forks, my calloused fingers, their designer dresses, my simple cardigan, their conversation about market trends, my silence heavy with memories no one asked to hear. Cassandra leaned toward one of her friends, a woman draped in diamonds, and began describing their summer in Italy. Daniel booked us a villa in Tuscany, she said, as though she were delivering a line from a magazine spread. We had wine from private vineyards, dinners under olive trees. I thought of the one time Daniel had been abroad before meeting her, a class trip, where I saved for months, just so he could see Paris for a week. He had come home with a cheap Eiffel Tower keychain, pressed it into my palm and said, "For you, Mom, so you'll always know I carried you there with me." That keychain still hung by my front door. I wondered if he even remembered giving it to me. The people at the table looked at me, only when Cassandra's eyes directed them to. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was part of the scenery, like the vase of lilies, or the antique clock, ticking faintly in the background. The only difference was that the lilies were admired. At one point, Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, are you comfortable?" His voice was soft, tentative, as though even asking that might upset his wife. I nodded quickly, too quickly, and answered, "Yes, dear. Very comfortable." But inside, I felt like a stone, sinking slowly in cold water. Cassandra smiled then, that kind of smile that looks sweet but tastes bitter. "It's good you're here," she said. "Matthew should know all his family, even if some can't keep up." Her hand brushed Daniel's arm, as though sealing him back into her world. I kept my eyes on Matthew, who giggled at the salt shaker as though it were a toy. He didn't see the invisible lines drawn between us, the subtle ways his mother carved me out of the picture. But one day he would, and that thought frightened me more than Cassandra's words ever could. Because if my grandson grew up believing his grandmother was useless, what piece of myself would I have left to give? When the plates were cleared and the laughter began to drift into smaller conversations, I thought perhaps the evening was nearly over. My casserole sat cold and untouched on the sideboard, covered once more with its foil like a secret no one wanted to see. I told myself I would take it home later, maybe eat it alone the next day. Food, after all, never turned its back on you. I rose quietly, intent on slipping into the kitchen to help the staff, to make myself useful in some way. But before I could move far, Cassandra's voice stopped me. "Mother," she said smoothly, gesturing toward the living room where leather couches gleamed under recessed lighting. "Why don't you sit with me for a moment?" The guests were still chatting around the table, but her tone left no room for refusal. I followed her, my hands twisting together nervously. Daniel trailed behind us for a few steps, then hesitated and veered back to pour another glass of wine. His silence clung to me heavier than the cardigan on my shoulders. We settled onto the couch. Cassandra crossed her legs elegantly, her red dress flowing like water, and reached into her purse. From the sleek leather, she pulled out a small, glossy card. She held it delicately between two manicured fingers, the way someone might dangle a prize, just out of reach. "This," she said, smiling thinly, "is for you." He blinked. "For me?" "A credit card," she explained, pressing it lightly into my palm, "linked to one of our accounts. It's just easier this way. When you're with Matthew, buy him things. Toys, clothes, whatever he needs. No need to ask each time. We'll cover it." I stared at the rectangle of plastic resting against my skin. The numbers glinted under the light, embossed and foreign, heavy in their meaning. I had never owned such a thing. In my world, you bought only what you could afford, paid in cash, saved coins in jars. Debt was a shadow you didn't invite inside. "Oh, I don't think," I began. But Cassandra cut me off with a gentle laugh. "Please, Mother. It's nothing. Really, just a way for you to contribute, without effort." That pause, that careful insertion of the word effort, stung more than she realized. Or perhaps she realized all too well. I looked toward the dining room. Daniel was still at the table, laughing politely with his friends, oblivious or pretending to be oblivious to the exchange unfolding just a few steps away. I suppose it would make things easier, I said softly, my voice trembling. But I don't want to impose. Cassandra leaned closer, her perfume expensive and sharp. You're not imposing. Think of it as staying relevant. You know how children are these days. They compare toys, gadgets. Matthew should never feel his grandmother isn't keeping up. Staying relevant. The words pressed into me like a thumb against a bruise. I nodded slowly, sliding the card into my purse, though it felt like slipping a foreign object into my heart. She patted my hand as though sealing a deal. Good. This way, everyone wins. But something inside me whispered otherwise. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a leash. Silken and smiling, but a leash nonetheless. When I left the house that night, Daniel kissed my cheek absently, distracted by his guests. Cassandra waved from the doorway, her smile perfect. Matthew hugged me tightly, whispering again about cookies, and I promised next time. Back home, I set the casserole dish in my fridge untouched. My purse, with the card inside, sat on the counter. I stared at it for a long while. It gleamed back at me like a key, but I couldn't tell whether it opened a door or locked one shut. I wanted to believe it was kindness, that maybe Cassandra was trying to bridge the distance between us. But in the quiet of my kitchen, surrounded by peeling linoleum and the hum of the old refrigerator, the card felt less like kindness and more like a quiet declaration. You are not enough on your own. You need this to matter. And though I slid it into my drawer, telling myself I would use it only for Matthew, a seed of unease had already taken root. I did not know then how quickly that seed would grow, how it would tangle itself around my dignity until I could barely breathe. The first time I opened the envelope, I thought there had been a mistake. The numbers were staggering, more than I had ever seen outside of hospital bills or mortgage statements. My hands trembled as I adjusted my glasses, reading line after line of purchases I knew I had never made. Designer boutiques, spas with names I couldn't pronounce, a jewelry store receipt that alone could have covered 3 months of my pension. All of it printed neatly, stacked one after another, totaling a sum that made my chest tighten. I set the paper on my kitchen table, beside the jar of coins I still kept for laundry. The contrast nearly broke me. At first, I thought perhaps the bank had confused accounts. I called the number on the back of the card, waiting as the automated voice led me through a maze of options. But when a representative finally answered, she confirmed politely, "Yes, ma'am. These are purchases from your authorized card, linked to Mr. and Mrs. Parker's household account." I hung up slowly, the receiver heavy in my hand. Authorized. Household. Words that sounded official, as though I had consented to being swept into a current I never chose. For days I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe Cassandra had used the card temporarily. Maybe Daniel would explain. Surely, it wasn't meant to be like this. But each month, the envelope came again, thick with receipts that grew more extravagant. One evening, I sat with Daniel at the kitchen island in his house. Cassandra was out, attending what she called a networking dinner. Matthew colored quietly at the other end of the counter. I slid the envelope toward him. "Daniel, I think there's been some mistake. Look at these charges." He glanced briefly, his eyes skimming the numbers, but never pausing. "It's fine, Mom," he said quickly, almost dismissively. "Don't worry about it. Cassandra handles these things." "But Daniel," I pressed gently, "these aren't my purchases. I've never even stepped into these stores." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to as a boy when he wanted to end a conversation. "Mom, it's complicated. Cassandra has accounts tied together for convenience. It's all under control. Convenience. The word struck me like a slap. My name, my dignity, reduced to a line item of convenience. I wanted to argue, to insist that this wasn't right. But Matthew looked up then, holding his drawing toward me proudly. "Grandma, it's us in the park," he said. His little smile, innocent and bright, swallowed my words whole. I couldn't bring darkness into that moment, so I nodded, folding the envelope closed, tucking it back into my purse, as though I could tuck away the unease gnawing at me. That night, back in my own kitchen, I spread the statements across the table, line after line of someone else's life, charged to my name. It felt as though I were watching my own identity being stolen not with violence, but with elegance, silk, and a smile. I traced one receipt with my finger, a dinner bill that could have paid for a month's groceries. I thought of all the times I'd counted pennies, patched clothes, skipped meals so Daniel could eat better. And now, my sacrifice was being converted into cocktails and caviar. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I pressed my forehead to the cool surface of the table, whispering to the empty room, "What am I becoming? A sponsor? A fool? Or worse, irrelevant?" I wanted to believe Daniel was blind, not complicit. I wanted to believe he still saw me as his mother, not as an open account. But deep down, a bitter truth began to take root. Cassandra hadn't given me a gift. She had handed me a tether. And with every swipe of that card, every glamorous purchase, the rope tightened around my pride. I just didn't know yet how close I was to suffocating. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind Cassandra insisted upon hosting once a month. She called it family tradition, though it felt less like tradition and more like ceremony. Her ceremony, her stage. The table was set even grander this time. Tall candles flickering, wine bottles lined like trophies, and plates already waiting, as though the evening were scripted before it began. I arrived early with a basket of apples from my garden, their skins mottled but sweet, carrying the smell of earth and honesty. Cassandra accepted them with a thin smile and placed them still in the basket by the back door. Guests began to arrive. Friends from Daniel's office, women dressed in pearls, men with watches that flashed under the lights. I sat quietly, Matthew perched on my lap, until Cassandra whisked him away to show our guests his piano piece. When dinner began, the conversation flowed easily around business, vacations, investments. I ate in silence, tasting little, waiting for the moment I dreaded and somehow knew was coming. Halfway through the main course, Cassandra set down her glass of wine with deliberate grace. The sound of crystal meeting wood silenced the room. Her eyes, cool and sharp, turned toward me. "Mother," she began, her tone sweet but edged with steel. "We've been thinking about the future, about stability for our household." I looked up slowly, my fork suspended. "Oh? Yes," she said, nodding as though her words were self-evident. "With Daniel's career, the house, Matthew's schooling, it all adds up. Appearances matter too. We host, we entertain. People notice these things." Her gaze swept the table, gathering murmurs of agreement. Then she delivered it, clear and deliberate. "We'd like you to contribute $10,000 a month, a steady allowance so the family can maintain what it needs." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. My chest constricted, and for a moment I thought I hadn't heard correctly. 10,000? I whispered. "Yes," Cassandra replied, smiling. "Surely you can manage it. After all, you don't have expenses like we do, and it would be a way to show your devotion, to stay relevant." The word stabbed again. sharper this time. Around the table, guests nodded politely, as though this were the most natural request in the world. I turned to Daniel, praying he would speak. His eyes flickered with discomfort, but he stayed silent, staring down at his plate, as though the risotto demanded all his attention. I've never, I began, but my voice faltered. Heat crept up my neck, shame rising, even though I had done nothing wrong. That's an enormous sum. Cassandra leaned forward, her elbows resting elegantly on the table. Mother, don't think of it as money. Think of it as an investment in us, in Matthew. You wouldn't want your grandson to feel less than his peers, would you? Gasps of air caught in my lungs. She had wielded the one weapon she knew I couldn't bear Matthew. I've always done what I could for him, I managed, my voice trembling. Then prove it, she said smoothly, her smile widening. This way, everyone knows the Parkers are strong, united, supported. I felt the walls of the dining room close in, the flickering candles mocking me, their flames dancing over polished glass. I wanted to cry out, to remind them of the years I had worked double shifts, the nights I had gone hungry so Daniel could eat. Instead, I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap. Surely you understand, Cassandra added, her tone softening only enough to feign sympathy. It's the least you can do, after all Daniel has achieved. He deserves a partner who isn't burdened by limitations. Limitations. Another word meant for me. Dressed in silk and poured like poison into the air. I looked around the table. No one defended me. Not my son, not the guests, not even the flicker of conscience in Cassandra's perfect smile. And in that silence I realized this was no request. It was a demand, wrapped in velvet, backed by the weight of family pride. I lowered my gaze, hiding the storm in my eyes. But deep inside, something shifted. Humiliation burned into something else, something harder, sharper, a seed of defiance, small, but alive. I didn't speak it that night, but in my heart, I knew I could not, would not, be their open purse. I thought the request for money was the end of it. I thought, perhaps naively, that once I refused quietly or stalled long enough, the matter would fade into the background. But Cassandra was not the kind of woman who let go of anything. She was the kind who tightened her grip until everyone around her bent or broke. It happened a week later, on a Wednesday afternoon. I had come to pick up Matthew from school, a little ritual I cherished whenever Daniel and Cassandra were busy. His small hand in mine, his chatter about spelling tests and playground games, it was the only time I felt whole again, the only proof that I still mattered. When we reached their house, Cassandra was waiting, not with her usual poised smile, but with a look that was all business, her red lips pressed into a thin line. "Mother, may I have a word?" she asked. Her voice was polite, but Matthew immediately sensed the tension and slipped upstairs without a sound. We stood in the living room, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. Cassandra didn't sit. She remained standing, arms folded, like a queen handing down judgment. "I hope you've had time to think about what we discussed," she began. $10,000 a month, stability, appearances. I swallowed, my hands twisting in front of me. "Cassandra, I don't have that kind of money to spare. I've worked my whole life, but my savings aren't bottomless. She cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Bottomless? You've been more fortunate than most. You own your home outright, don't you? You live alone. No rent. No mortgage. What exactly are you saving it for? You're not getting younger." Her words pierced me. but I held steady. I've earned what little I have, and I want to use it for my future, for my grandson, not to. Exactly, she said quickly, stepping closer. For your grandson. That's what this is about. Do you really think Matthew won't notice when he has less than his friends? No ski trips, no private tutors, no designer clothes. Children talk, mother. They compare. Do you want him to feel ashamed of his grandmother? My breath caught. Ashamed? She nodded, her eyes gleaming with cold triumph. Children are cruel. They notice everything. If you can't contribute, if you can't help us maintain the life he deserves, what do you think he'll feel about you when he's old enough to understand? He'll see you for what you are, someone who couldn't provide, someone useless. The word again, useless, like a chain, dragging behind me, louder each time she said it. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I love him, I whispered. I would do anything for him. Then prove it, she snapped, her tone softening into false sweetness. Show him how much you love him. Give us what we need. Or, she let the pause stretch, savoring it. Don't be surprised if your time with him becomes less frequent. We can't have him influenced by small thinking. The room tilted around me. I gripped the edge of a chair to steady myself, her words ringing in my ears. Less time with Matthew, my grandson, my light, the only soul who reached for me without judgment. You wouldn't, I whispered. Her smile was cruel and calm. Wouldn't I? I'm his mother. I decide who he spends his time with. Remember that. I wanted to shout, to rage, to claw the words from her mouth. But my throat closed. My knees felt weak. I sank into the chair, shaking, while she towered over me. You have a week, she added lightly, as if discussing nothing more serious than ordering flowers. Think carefully. We'll expect your answer by then. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome counting down my dignity. When the door closed, I sat frozen, the silence pressing down on me. For the first time, I felt what true helplessness was: not poverty, not loneliness, but the threat of being cut away from the one person who still looked at me with love. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the framed photograph of Matthew on the refrigerator. His gap-toothed smile beamed back at me, innocent, unknowing. My hands shook as I touched the glass. How could a mother use her own child as a weapon? How could she twist the purest bond I had left into leverage? I thought of calling Daniel, of begging him to intervene, but the memory of his silence at the dinner table stopped me. He wouldn't stand against her. Not yet. So I sat there, tears sliding down my cheeks, whispering into the empty room. I won't lose him. I can't. And though I didn't yet know how, I felt something stir deep inside me, a fragile thread of resolve. Cassandra had crossed a line, and somehow, some way, I would find the strength to draw my own. That night, the house felt colder than it ever had. The radiator hissed in the corner, but no warmth reached me. I sat in the kitchen long after the sky outside had gone black, a single bulb overhead casting a yellow glow that made the linoleum look even more tired, the wallpaper more faded. My casserole dish, still half full, sat untouched on the counter. I had no appetite. The silence pressed against me, thick and heavy. I could still hear Cassandra's words ringing like bells that wouldn't stop tolling. Wouldn't I? I'm his mother. I decide who he spends his time with. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, my hands covering my face. For the first time in years, I felt the kind of despair that makes you question your very existence. Useless, irrelevant, a burden. These words circled in my mind like vultures. I thought of Matthew's small hand slipping into mine that afternoon, his voice asking about cookies. Could I really be cut out of his life so easily? Reduced to a shadow. A name mentioned in passing. Your grandmother. Oh, she couldn't manage. Tears burned my eyes. I let them fall freely, dripping onto the stack of envelopes in front of me. Bills, statements, reminders of everything slipping out of my control. Each drop blurred the ink, as though even paper couldn't hold up under the weight of my grief. My mind wandered backward, unbidden, to the years when life had been simpler, though not easier. I remembered standing at the stove, stirring pots of soup while Daniel sat at the table with his homework. He'd look up, frustrated, and I'd smile and say, "You're smarter than that page, son. Take it one line at a time." And he would. He always did. I remembered walking to work in winter, boots with holes stuffed with newspaper to keep the snow out, just so Daniel could have shoes without patches. I remembered the nights I went to bed hungry because I had scraped my portion onto his plate. I had poured myself into motherhood so completely that when he left for college, I wasn't sure what pieces of myself remained. But I was proud. Proud that he had become something more. Someone successful. Someone with a life bigger than mine. I told myself the sacrifices had been worth it. But sitting there now, in the silence of my kitchen, I wondered if all of it had only led me to this. A mother no longer needed. A grandmother threatened into buying her place in the family. The clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of time slipping away. My body ached, not just from age but from carrying so much invisible weight for so long. For a fleeting moment, I thought of giving in. 10,000 a month. Maybe I could sell the house, dip into my savings, let them have what they wanted. If it meant keeping Matthew close, wasn't it worth it? But then I thought of what that would mean. That my love could be priced. That I could be bought. Rented like an apartment. Traded like a piece of property. And if I gave in once, what would stop them from asking for more? Where would it end? I rose from the table and walked to the small bookshelf in the living room. On it sat photographs. Daniel as a boy with missing teeth. Daniel at graduation. Daniel holding Matthew as a newborn. I touched the frame of the last one, tracing the outline of my grandson's tiny face. "Not like this," I whispered. "I won't let them turn my love into currency. I won't let them take him from me, or make him believe I am nothing." I returned to the kitchen, the envelopes still spread out, and pulled a notebook from the drawer. My handwriting was shaky, but I began to write. Not numbers, not calculations, but truths. I am not useless. I am not irrelevant. I am Matthew's grandmother, and I have worth beyond what money can measure. The words steadied me, though my hands still trembled. I knew I wasn't ready to fight Cassandra yet. I wasn't ready to face Daniel's silence again, but I also knew I couldn't stay in this limbo, drowning in their demands. The night stretched long. I made tea I didn't drink, stared at the steam until it disappeared, listened to the hum of the fridge, as though it were a voice reminding me I was still here. And somewhere in those hours between midnight and dawn, a fragile resolve began to take root. Cassandra had pushed me to the edge, but she had also shown me something important. I had let my boundaries fade, and now they needed to be redrawn. The first step, I decided, would be to take back control of the one thing she thought she owned: my finances. That card in my drawer was no gift. It was a chain, and chains, once recognized, can be broken. As the sun finally began to rise, spilling pale light through the curtains, I sat straighter. My eyes still burned from crying, but they were clearer now. The night had stripped me bare. Yes, but in that emptiness, I found the seed of something I hadn't felt in years: strength. Morning light filled the kitchen, thin but insistent. I hadn't slept, but I no longer felt numb. Instead, A strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes after a storm. My hands were steady. As I opened the drawer and pulled out the glossy card, Cassandra had pressed into my palm. For a moment, I stared at it, remembering her words. Think of it as staying relevant. Relevant. That word no longer stung the way it had before. It sounded hollow now, like a cheap ornament dressed up to look like gold. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of the card. The automated voice droned through its options, but I didn't hesitate. I'd like to cancel this card, I told the representative firmly when the line connected. Effective immediately. No replacements. The woman on the other end paused, perhaps surprised by the tremorless certainty in my voice. Yes, ma'am. I'll process that right away. When I hung up, a weight lifted from my chest. The chain had snapped, but that was only the beginning. Cassandra would not stop at a canceled card. She would find another way to tighten her grip, and I needed to be ready. I opened the small metal box where I kept my savings documents, bank books, a few bonds, the deed to my house. Each paper was a reminder of years of toil and sacrifice, of nights I'd sewn until my fingers bled, of mornings I'd walked to work through the snow. These were not Cassandra's to spend. They were mine, and they were Matthew's future. I called a lawyer the next day. He was an old acquaintance from church, someone I trusted. We met in his office, a modest space filled with books and the faint smell of coffee. I told him everything, the card, the statements, the demands. My voice shook at times, but I didn't stop. He listened quietly, then nodded. You want to set up a trust, directly for your grandson. That way, the funds are protected, accessible only for his benefit. Yes, I said, my fingers gripping the edge of his desk. I don't want a single dollar to pass through Cassandra's hands. This is for Matthew, not her lifestyle. He smiled faintly, perhaps sensing the steel behind my words. That can be arranged. As we went through the paperwork, I felt the fog of helplessness lift with each signature. Every pen stroke was a declaration. I am not useless. I will decide what becomes of my life's work. Leaving the office, I walked down the busy street with my head higher than it had been in months. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath my shoes. For the first time in a long while, I felt the ground solid beneath me. But I knew Cassandra wouldn't see it that way. To her, my decision would be rebellion, defiance, and rebellion had consequences. A week later, I visited Daniel's house. Cassandra greeted me with her usual poised smile, though her eyes sharpened when she saw my expression. I handed her the card, now cut cleanly in half. What is this? She asked coolly. I canceled it. I said simply. It was never mine to begin with. Her smile faltered. You shouldn't have done that. I also spoke to a lawyer. I continued, my voice calm, but firm. All of my assets are now in a trust for Matthew. He'll be provided for, directly, but you will not be using my name or my savings for your expenses. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy as stone. Daniel appeared in the hallway, confusion flickering across his face. Mom, what's going on? I looked at him, my heart aching, but I didn't waver. I love you, Daniel. I always will, but I will not be treated as a bank account. I am your mother, not your financier. And if being in this house means surrendering my dignity, then I will walk away. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at Cassandra, then back at me, torn. But he didn't speak. Cassandra's lips curled into something like a smirk. So, this is your stand, Mother? Drawing lines like some heroine in a cheap novel? This is not a novel, I said quietly. This is my life. And I have drawn the line. I turned to leave, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me out the door. As I stepped into the crisp air, a surge of fear mingled with freedom. I didn't know what would come next, whether Cassandra would strike back harder, whether Daniel would ever find his voice. But I knew this. For the first time in a long time, I had chosen myself. And that choice, fragile as it was, felt like the beginning of something unbreakable. I thought my declaration would be the end of it. I thought Cassandra would rage, perhaps sulk, but eventually accept the boundary I had drawn. I underestimated her. 3 nights later, Daniel called. His voice was strained, the way it had been when he was a boy caught between truth and trouble. "Mom," he said, "Cassandra wants to talk. Can you come by tomorrow? Just hear her out." I nearly refused, but the exhaustion in his tone softened me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived the next evening, the house was quieter than usual. No guests, no clinking glasses. Cassandra stood in the living room, perfectly poised, as though waiting for a photographer. Daniel sat stiffly on the sofa, his hands knotted in his lap. And then I saw him, an older man, rising slowly from an armchair near the window. His suit was expensive but slightly wrinkled, his hair silver at the temples. His eyes, though, were sharp and familiar. "This is my father," Cassandra said smoothly. "He wanted to join us." The man extended a hand. "Arthur," he introduced himself. His grip was firm, warmer than I expected. "I've heard quite a bit about you." Something in his tone, measured, deliberate, told me that what he had heard might not have been flattering. We all sat. Cassandra crossed her legs elegantly. Daniel kept his gaze low, and Arthur leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Cassandra tells me," Arthur began, "that you've refused to support their household financially. Is that correct?" My throat tightened, but I met his gaze. "I've chosen to protect what I have for Matthew, directly. Not for dinner parties or designer dresses. For his future." For a moment, silence stretched. Cassandra's eyes glittered, waiting for her father's verdict. Then Arthur chuckled, not cruelly, but with a note of disbelief. "Cassandra," he said, turning to her, "you asked your mother-in-law for $10,000 a month?" Cassandra stiffened. "Father, it's about stability. Appearances matter." "Appearances," Arthur interrupted, his voice firm. "Appearances have drained more families than poverty ever has." Her face flushed, lips pressing into a line. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Arthur turned back to me. "I raised Cassandra to be ambitious. Perhaps I overdid it. But let me say this. You are right to set boundaries. If my daughter cannot respect them, that is her failing, not yours." The room went still. Cassandra's eyes widened, the confidence draining from her posture. Daniel looked up for the first time, his mouth slightly open. "I won't apologize for protecting my life's work," I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt. "I gave everything to raise Daniel. I won't watch it be squandered." Arthur nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And you shouldn't. I've seen how easily money can corrode love when it becomes the only measure of worth." Cassandra's composure cracked. "Father, how can you take her side? She doesn't understand what it takes to live at this level. She'll embarrass us." Arthur's gaze hardened. "The only embarrassment here is demanding tribute from a woman who's already given more than enough." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since I had known her, Cassandra was speechless. Daniel rubbed his temples, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, please." Arthur placed a hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. "Daniel, you've let this go too far. It's time you remembered who carried you to this point. Not Cassandra's credit cards, not these soirees. Your mother. The words struck Daniel like a blow. His shoulders slumped, guilt etching itself across his face. I sat quietly, stunned by the unexpected defense. For months, I had stood alone, enduring humiliation and silence. Now, suddenly, someone else spoke the truth aloud. Cassandra rose abruptly, her heels clicking against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. She swept from the room, her perfume trailing behind her like smoke. The silence that followed was heavy, but not oppressive. It was relief. Arthur turned back to me. You've done the right thing. Hold your line. Cassandra will fight it, but she'll learn. Respect is not given freely, it's earned. And you've earned it 10 times over. Tears welled in my eyes. I managed a nod. My voice caught in my throat. Thank you. He gave a small smile, weary but kind. Consider me your ally now. You won't stand alone. As I left the house that night, the air felt different. Crisp, cool, alive. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt seen, validated. I walked to my car slowly, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, and whispered to myself, maybe I'm not useless after all. The following week, the tension in Daniel's house thickened like storm clouds before rain. I knew Cassandra wouldn't let her father's rebuke be the final word. She was not a woman who surrendered quietly. And true enough, another invitation arrived this time, not for a dinner, not for guests, but for a family discussion. I went, not out of obligation, but out of determination. I had spent too many nights shrinking into silence. It was time to speak. When I entered the living room, Cassandra stood near the fireplace, her red dress like armor, her chin lifted defiantly. Daniel sat on the sofa, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. He looked as though he hadn't slept. Matthew was upstairs with a babysitter, mercifully spared from what was about to unfold. Mother, Cassandra began, her voice cool. We need to settle this. The way things have been going, it's unacceptable. For the family. For Matthew. I remained standing, refusing to be placed in the position of a defendant on trial. I've already made my decision. My finances are in a trust for Matthew. That is final. Her lips curved into a sharp smile. You think that makes you noble? No, it makes you stubborn. You've chosen control over generosity. You've chosen pride over love. My chest tightened, but I held steady. Love is not measured in dollars, Cassandra. And pride? Pride is all I have left. After being humiliated in my own son's home. Daniel flinched at that, his head bowing lower. Cassandra's eyes flashed. You talk about humiliation? What about responsibility? You should be honored we allow you to be part of this household at all. You bring nothing. No sophistication. No status. If you refuse to contribute financially, what use are you here? Her words rang like a verdict, cold and final. For a heartbeat, silence blanketed the room. My hands trembled, but I didn't hide them. I let her see. Then I lifted my head, my voice steady and clear. I am your husband's mother. I carried him in my body. I raised him on scraps and prayers. I worked myself to the bone so he could stand where he stands today. That is my contribution. That is my legacy. And if you cannot respect it, that says nothing about my worth and everything about your blindness. Cassandra's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. Her tone sharpened. You're delusional. Do you think anyone cares about your sacrifices now? This world rewards relevance, not sentiment. I took a step closer, my voice rising with decades of swallowed silence. No, Cassandra. This world rewards strength, and strength is knowing when to say enough. I am not your bank. I am not your servant. I am not useless. I am a mother, a grandmother, and I will not let you buy or bully your way into erasing me. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes wide, glistening. His lips parted, but no words came. Cassandra, furious, turned on him. Are you just going to sit there? Say something. Tell her she's wrong. For the first time in months, Daniel did not bow to her. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. She's not wrong, Cassandra. The words hung in the air like thunder. Cassandra spun on him, disbelief etched across her face. What did you say? She's not wrong, he repeated, stronger this time. You've crossed a line. Mom deserves respect, and if I haven't given it, then I've failed her. But I won't fail her again. He jine, my breath caught. After so long, after so much silence, my son had finally found his voice. Cassandra's fury ignited. So you choose her over me? Over your wife? Over your son's future? Daniel shook his head. I choose what's right, and what's right is not extorting my mother. Matthew deserves love, not leverage. Her face hardened, her fists clenched at her sides. You'll regret this. Maybe, he said quietly. But I won't regret standing up for my mother. The room vibrated with the force of what had just been spoken. For once, Cassandra had no clever retort, no polished barb. She turned sharply, storming out of the room, the door slamming behind her. Silence followed. Heavy but different this time, liberating, not suffocating. Daniel turned to me, his voice low, thick with shame. Mom, I should have defended you sooner. I'm sorry. I reached for his hand, my eyes brimming. You've said enough tonight, son. More than enough. For the first time in months, I felt the ground beneath me steady, the weight of dignity restored. Cassandra might rage, she might plot, but the tide had shifted. The silence that had once trapped me had been broken by my voice, and now by Daniel's, and in that moment I knew. The battle was not just about money or appearances. It was about identity, about refusing to vanish in the shadow of someone else's arrogance, and I had won. The days after that confrontation passed with a stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not silence born of fear, but of space. Space I had carved out by saying no, by refusing to bow. Cassandra avoided me, her footsteps echoing in other rooms whenever I visited. And that was fine. I hadn't fought to be in her favor. I had fought to reclaim myself. Daniel was different now. His voice carried a new weight when he spoke to me, as though he had finally remembered who I was, not just a background figure in his glittering life, but the woman who had carried him here. He called more often, sometimes for no reason at all. Just wanted to check in, Mom, he'd say. And those words soothed places in me I hadn't realized were still raw. Matthew remained the bridge between worlds. When I picked him up from school, he held my hand tightly, chattering about everything from dinosaurs to spelling tests. Once, he tugged at my sleeve and whispered, Grandma, are you mad at Mommy? His wide eyes searched mine, innocent, untainted by the games adults played. I bent down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. No, sweetheart, I told him softly. I'm not mad. I just want to make sure we all remember what love really means. He nodded, accepting my answer without question. And in that moment I knew, as long as I held on to my bond with him, Cassandra could not win. One evening, Arthur, the man I had never expected to stand beside me, called. His voice was gravelly but kind. You did well, he said. I've seen my daughter push people too far before, But you held your ground. Don't let her pull you back into her games. Oh, I don't intend to, I replied. Though part of me still trembled at the thought of Cassandra's fury, Arthur sighed. She'll learn, or she won't. But you've shown Daniel and Matthew something important. That matters more than any truffle dinner or designer dress. When the call ended, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. I looked around at the modest walls, the chipped countertop, the worn linoleum floor. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of any of it. These walls had held laughter. These counters had fed a child who grew into a man. This home was proof that usefulness isn't measured in appearance, but in love sustained through years. Cassandra never apologized. I never expected her to. The wounds she had tried to inflict would take time to heal, but I no longer needed her acknowledgement. What I needed was already within me, the certainty that I had not been erased, that my worth could not be dictated by anyone else's judgment. Daniel began to invite me over more often, not for grand dinners, but for quieter evenings. A simple meal, Matthew showing me his schoolwork, Daniel asking about recipes he half remembered from his childhood. Cassandra remained polite, but distant, her eyes cold, but her power over me had dimmed. She could no longer use silence as a weapon, nor money as a leash. And as for Matthew, he climbed onto my lap one night and whispered, "Grandma, I love your cooking more than truffles." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "That's because you know the secret ingredient," I teased. "What's that?" he asked eagerly. "Love," I said, pressing a kiss to his curls. He giggled, satisfied with the answer, and in that small, ordinary moment, I realized something. Cassandra could strip me of dignity in public. She could demand money. She could even try to weaponize my grandson, but she could never erase the truth of who I was to him. The story doesn't end with perfect reconciliation. Cassandra and I are not friends, nor will we ever be. But she knows now that I will not bend, and Daniel knows that silence is no longer an option. I don't pretend the road ahead will be easy. Families rarely heal without scars, but scars are proof of survival, not weakness. As I sit here now writing these words, I want to ask you, yes, you listening to my story, have you ever been pushed to the edge by someone you love? Have you ever been told you are useless, only to discover your strength in saying no? If you have, then you understand what I mean when I say setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is love turned inward, a way of preserving the dignity that makes us human. I may not host glittering dinners. I may not wear silk gowns or sip wine under chandeliers, but I know who I am. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. And I am not useless. If you've ever had to fight for your worth, share your story below. Let's remind each other that dignity cannot be bought or stolen. It must be lived. And if my story has touched you, if you've ever felt unseen or unheard, I ask you, subscribe, stay, be part of this community. Because none of us should walk through nights like mine alone.